What will Vote-A-Rama be like? It'll be like hell. They deserve this. As much as I admire Joe Manchin and Sinema for standing up to the radical left at times, they're empowering legislation that will make the average person's life more difficult.
Welcome back. That was Senator Lindsey Graham this morning with his warning for Democrats as they prepare to put what they call the Inflation Reduction Act on the Senate floor tomorrow. It's a bill that's mostly about energy, prescription drugs, and deficit reduction. Republicans say they're going to do whatever they can to stop this bill, but it can pass with a simple majority. And with Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema now on board, Democrats appear to have the votes they need to get this done. Sinema's cooperation came at the expense of a major tax provision funding the bill, one that would have closed what's called a loophole, if you will, that allows many top hedge fund earners to pay a reduced rate. But the bill may have landed in a better place for many Democrats because it replaced that lost tax revenue with a tax on stock buybacks, and it actually may bring in more revenue for deficit reduction. So if the bill passes, it would be the third major legislative win for the Democrats just in the last 2 weeks, largely, by the way, without too much help, it appears, from the White House. So joining me now, Democratic Senator from Illinois, Dick Durbin, the number 2 leader in the Senate for the Democrats. Senator Durbin, always good to see you. So let me start with what got traded in and out on the tax provision. You sort of, I feel like it sounds like you morally don't like the carried interest loophole. But where are you today with where they came out?
Well, I think it's a good compromise. The carried interest loophole is impossible to defend. People are getting a tax break. They're getting their income treated as a capital gain without risking any capital. That's just not what the tax code is supposed to be about. But I'll tell you, putting a tax on the stock buybacks, it's about time. And we're going to raise even more revenue than we had under the carried interest loophole closure. So I think it's a step in the right direction. The wealthiest people who are making the most money in our economy will pay slightly more, and it'll discourage some bad conduct.
You're still waiting for, I always love using this phrase, and only in Washington phrase, you're still waiting for the bird bath to be completed for this bill. And I guess one of the provisions that I think could be tricky has to do with the prescription drug benefit issue here. What are you most concerned about with the parliamentarian that could alter it, that suddenly makes the prescription drug part less impactful?
We have our fingers crossed because politicians of both political parties have been promising for a generation or more that we're going to do something about prescription drug pricing. And American families are saying to us, part of the problem with inflation is prescription drugs as well as the cost of health insurance. Well, our bill attacks both of them, brings them down for seniors and for other Americans. So we've got to go through this final procedural hurdle. There's no way to know how the parliamentarian will ultimately rule, but we think we have it written in a fashion that will allow many of us who've made this promise over the years keep it.
What is that issue that could make it not? I mean, what's the precarious piece of this, if you don't mind getting into it?
Well, in the most general terms, it's a question whether it's a financial provision or a policy provision. And I've been through this so many different times. There are different ways to skin a cat. And I think we've given the parliamentarian a substantial amount of time because this is a complex measure. And she's going to do her best and do it professionally. And I hope she finds, as we believe she will, that the American families and seniors in particular need a break when it comes to prescription drugs.
Let me... There is something you have lost in reconciliation on in the past, but I'm wondering if the current economic reports give you a better shot the next time, and that is some immigration reform. You've tried a few times to see if you could get immigration reform provisions into reconciliation packages. And there's always, it's really not met the financial test, is my understanding of it, in the simplest terms. But the fact that we have this bizarre economy that essentially doesn't have enough labor, right? We are short labor here. Is there a way you could come back and make the budgetary argument for immigration reform?
Well, I tell you what, I really threw in the towel after spending all of last year trying to achieve that goal. I just came to the conclusion that reconciliation as we currently know it is not going to be the proper vehicle. But that doesn't mean we should walk away from immigration reform. We need to have stability at our border. We need to have an orderly process. We don't have it today. We need to have a process where the people who are needed in our workforce, and there are many, think of agricultural workers as an obvious one, need to have a path to get through the morass of entry into the United States in a proper legal manner. I find more and more Republicans who say, of course, Durbin, you're right about that. Well, we've got to bring them together, and I hope we can start in September with a conversation of how to achieve that. We're not going to do comprehensive reform. It's more than we can achieve in the rest of this year. But remaining elements of bringing in key workers make a difference. My colleague Tammy Duckworth has a provision that will help us recruit more people who currently don't have citizenship status but can qualify for a green card if they're accepted into the military and pass all the tests, ultimately leading to their citizenship. We have a need for healthcare workers at every possible level to come into this country, and we should be changing the immigration law to accommodate that. And I mentioned the farm workers. That's a bipartisan effort that passed handily in the House of Representatives. So things we can do in immigration, not with reconciliation, but in a manner that I think serves our economy.
I think if you just call it the Immigration and Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, I have kid, but the issue of immigrant labor is impacting our current inflationary situation. But again, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Though there is one other immigration-related question I have for you. Senator Menendez has kind of issued a bit of a threat to his fellow Democrats that if during the vote-a-rama, perhaps Title 42 or some other what might be considered controversial immigration measures that amendments that Republicans offer, that may lure a couple of embattled 2022 Democrats to vote for it, that his vote for reconciliation, is on the line. Are Democrats going to stay united in this vote-a-rama?
Well, Chuck Schumer has made it clear to the caucus, and I believe that overwhelmingly they agree with him. Our policy is basically no amendments. We have a bill that, when it's cleared by the parliamentarian, is going to make a big difference in deficit reduction, inflation reduction, the reduction in the cost of prescription drugs, as well as health care premiums, just to name a few. And I haven't even touched the area of environmentalism, and that's a major portion as well. And he said, if we get into give and take with amendments, who knows what this final package will look like. So we start with the premise that we're going to try to pass a clean bill in the Senate, no matter how many amendments are offered by the other side.
And then finally, the situation in China. China chose to be outraged by the speaker's visit. A lot of your colleagues go to Taiwan. This is not an infrequent stop for elected officials in this country. What's China's decision to do this? Where do you see this going? And are we suddenly in a situation where maybe China invading Taiwan is more real than we realize?
Well, I certainly hope not. We live in a dangerous world, and I don't want to see it more dangerous. But I will tell you this. I think that part of this is full outrage on the part of the Chinese. We have a situation where our feelings have been known about Taiwan for decades, for generations. Delegation after delegation has visited Taiwan without murmur from the Chinese. And in this situation, I actually went with Nancy Pelosi years ago to China. They knew her position on the human rights outrages in China at the time. So this is no surprise visit or no surprise position from her. I think they are making some noise, and I hope that's all it turns out to be. But we cannot let the Chinese have a clearinghouse to determine where Americans, particularly elected officials, can travel safely in this world.
Yeah, that's for sure. Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, the #2 Democrat in the Senate. As always, sir, thanks for coming on, sharing your perspective.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.